The galaxy had known about humans for almost 40 years, and in that time, most alien species had decided one simple thing about them. Humans were weak. They had no large fleet. They had no strange powers. They did not glow, or float, or speak with their minds. They were soft, slow, and short-lived. Many species in the Galactic Assembly saw humans as a curiosity, a young race that had been led into the bigger community out of pity more than respect. The Threxians were one of those species. Tall, blue-skinned, with sharp eyes and calm faces, the Threxians were proud of their long history. They had crossed the stars for over 1,000 years. They had fought wars, built empires, and studied 100 worlds. When they first met humans at a trade summit, they were polite, because politeness was expected. But behind closed doors, their officers laughed about how easy it would be to push humans around if they ever had to. Commander Voss Kale did not laugh with them. He was a careful man, trained to notice small things others missed. He had read every report on Earth that the Threxian Science Division could find, and one thing always caught his attention. On every human star map, on every open record shared with the Galactic Assembly, there was a strange gap, a blank space on the surface of Earth itself, marked only with a single line of text: restricted, do not enter, no exceptions. It was not a small area. It stretched across what used to be called Siberia, thousands of kilometers of empty land, fenced and watched, with old warning signs in a dozen human languages. No satellite images were shared of it. No human diplomat would explain it. When Voss had once asked a human officer about it during a formal dinner, the man's face had gone pale, and he had simply said, "Please don't ask about that," before changing the subject. Voss found this more interesting than frightening. A species that hid something that big, that carefully, for that long, either had something very dangerous inside, or something very valuable. Either way, it was worth looking at. He brought his idea to his superior, Fleet Director Anthem Rel, a heavy-set Threxian with 3 medals on his chest and very little patience for humans. Rel listened, arms crossed, as Voss explained the blank zone on Earth's maps and the strange fear in human eyes whenever it came up. "You think humans are hiding a weapon," Rel said. "I think they're hiding something," Voss answered. "A weapon, a resource, an old ruin, I don't know. But I know this: humans do not talk about it, ever, not once. In 40 years, has a human government explained what is inside that zone. That is not normal behavior for allies." Rel tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. The Threxian Assembly had grown nervous in recent months. 2 other species, the Core and the Ashen Combine, had been pushing for more trade rights near human space, hoping to get ahead of everyone else. If the Threxians could learn what humans were hiding, and if it turned out to be something valuable, they could gain real power in future dealings. If it turned out to be a weapon, even better. Leverage was leverage. "You want to send a scout team," Rel said. "A small one. 4 people. In and out, quiet, no contact with human forces. We only need to see what is there. Photographs, readings, proof." Rel was silent for a long moment. What Voss was suggesting broke at least 6 different treaties between the Threxian Assembly and the human government. If they were caught, it would be a diplomatic disaster. But Rel had climbed to his rank by taking risks that paid off, and something about a hidden alien mystery on a weak species homeworld pulled at his pride. If humans really were weak, then nothing in that zone could hurt a trained Threxian team. If humans were hiding something powerful, well, wasn't it better that the Threxians find out first, quietly, rather than let some other species get there before them? 4 people, Rel said finally. "No weapons fire unless your lives are threatened. No contact with human forces. If anything goes wrong, you pull out immediately. Understood?" "Understood," Voss said, though even as he said it, some small part of him wondered if he was making a mistake. He pushed the thought away. He had led over a dozen missions across a dozen worlds. He was not a man who backed down from a closed door. He wanted to know what was behind it. The team Voss chose was small but skilled. Lyra Sen was their scientist, a quiet woman with a gift for reading old technology and strange energy signals. She had spent years studying ruins on dead worlds, learning to understand things that no living being remembered building. Dorn Rask was their soldier, big and steady. a man who had survived 3 border conflicts and never once panicked under fire. And Ethmol was their pilot and technician, young for the mission but brilliant with machines, able to fix almost anything with whatever was on hand. They trained for 3 weeks before the mission, going over stealth methods, human technology, and emergency plans. Lyra spent most of her free time studying what little data existed about the zone. She found old satellite photos from before the humans had blacked out the area completely. Grainy images showing strange shapes half buried in gray earth, shapes that did not look like human buildings. "Look at this," she said to Voss one evening, showing him an old image on her screen. It showed what looked like a huge curved wall, rising out of the ground, broken and rusted, stretching for kilometers before disappearing into the horizon. "This is not human architecture. The angles are wrong. The materials, based on what little I can tell from the image, do not match anything humans use." "So the rumors could be true," Voss said. "Something crashed there. Something that wasn't human. Or something was built there, a long time ago, by someone else," Lyra said. "And humans found it. And whatever it is, it scared them enough to fence off an entire region and never speak of it again." That thought stayed with Voss through the following weeks. He had assumed the zone held a human secret, a weapon, or a resource the government wanted to keep for itself. But what if it wasn't human at all? What if humans had found something dangerous, something left behind by another species, and had spent generations quietly guarding it, hiding it, from a galaxy that didn't even know they existed yet? If that was true, then the humans weren't hiding weakness in that zone. They were hiding a threat, and threats, Voss knew from long experience, had a habit of waking up when least expected. He almost called off the mission twice, but pride, curiosity, and the pressure from Rel pushed him forward each time. He told himself they would only look. Photographs and readings, nothing more. In and out before anyone noticed. What harm could that do? The team left Threxian space quietly, using a small unmarked shuttle disguised as a private trade vessel. It took them 11 days to reach Earth's system, moving slowly to avoid detection by the growing network of human satellites and drones that watched the space around their homeworld. Humans, Voss noted with some surprise, had far more of these small watching machines than he expected for a species so young to space travel. It should have told him something. He did not fully listen. They landed at night, far from any human city, using a stealth pod that dropped silently through the atmosphere and buried itself into a frozen field, 40 kilometers from the edge of the Forbidden Zone. From there, they would travel on foot and by small hover sled, moving under cover of darkness and bad weather, staying off any road or path a human patrol might use. The land around them was empty and cold, covered in old snow and gray grass. Ithmol checked their equipment one more time before they set out. Stealth suits that bent light around their bodies, breathing masks for the thin, freezing air, and small scanning devices to record everything they found. Dorn Rask checked his sidearm, more out of habit than expectation of using it. Lyrasen carried a small case of sensors, ready to read any strange energy the moment they crossed into the zone. "Remember," Voss said to his team as they gathered at the edge of the frozen field, the wind biting at their thermal suits. "We are here to observe, not to disturb. If we see anything that looks like it could be dangerous, we record it and we leave. No touching unknown devices, no triggering old machines. In, look, out. That is the mission." His team nodded, and they began to walk. The first fence line appeared after 6 hours of travel, rising out of the snow like a gray wall stretching in both directions, farther than they could see. It was old, rusted in places, but still standing, with thick metal posts and heavy wire strung between them. Warning signs hung every 100 meters, most faded and cracked with age, but still readable in the moonlight. The words were in many human languages, but the message was always the same: do not cross, do not enter, turn back. Beyond the fence, cameras sat on tall poles, most looking old and unused, some clearly newer, their small red lights blinking steadily in the dark. Lyra scanned them quietly. "Some of these are still active," she whispered. "Old system, but working. We need to avoid their line of sight." Dorn found a gap in the fence a kilometer further along, where the wire had rusted through and fallen, creating a narrow space just wide enough for a person to slip through. He tested the ground carefully first, watching for any hidden sensor or trap, before waving the others forward. One by one, the four Threxians slipped through the broken fence and stepped onto the frozen ground of Earth's forbidden zone. Nothing happened. No alarm sounded. No light flashed. The wind kept blowing, cold and steady, over the empty white land ahead of them. Voss let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Keep moving," he said quietly. "Stay low, stay quiet, and stay together." They walked on through the night, their stealth suits blending them into shadow, their breathing masks hissing softly with each breath. The land beyond the fence looked at first no different from the land outside it. The same snow, the same gray grass, the same empty horizon. But slowly, as they moved deeper, small differences began to appear. The snow here seemed thinner in patches, as if something beneath the ground gave off a faint warmth. The wind carried a strange, metallic smell that none of them could place. And twice, Lyra's sensors picked up brief bursts of energy from somewhere deep underground, gone before she could fully read them. "Something is down there," she said. "Something big. I'm reading structures, maybe kilometers wide, buried beneath the surface. And there's power. Not human power. The signature doesn't match anything in our database." Voss stopped walking and looked out at the empty land stretching before them, silver and cold under the stars. Somewhere beneath his feet, something vast slept in the earth, something humans had spent generations hiding from a galaxy full of strangers. He thought again about the warning signs, the fences, the fear in that human officer's eyes at dinner all those months ago. He should have turned back then. He knew it, even as he took another step forward. But curiosity had always been stronger in him than caution, and now, standing on ground no alien had ever walked before, he felt that same pull dragging him deeper into the dark. "Let's find out what they're hiding," he said, and the team moved on into the night, not knowing that somewhere far above them, in the quiet dark of orbit, something had already begun to watch them back. By the time the sun rose, the Threxian team had walked almost 30 kilometers into the forbidden zone, and the land around them had changed in ways none of them expected. The snow had thinned out completely, replaced by gray, cracked earth that looked burned, though nothing around them showed signs of fire. Strange metal shapes rose from the ground here and there, twisted and rusted, some as tall as buildings, others small enough to step over. None of them looked human-made. None of them looked like anything in the Threxian records either. Lyra Sen moved slowly between the wreckage, her scanner held out in front of her, recording everything. "These shapes," she said quietly, "they're not random. Look at the patterns. This was a structure once, a very big one. It's been broken apart, but the pieces are still arranged like they fell from something larger." Dorn Rask crouched beside one twisted piece of metal, running a gloved hand along its surface. "Doesn't look like it fell," he said. "Look at these edges. They're clean, almost like they were cut, or blown apart from the inside." Voss Kale stood a little apart from the others, looking out at the wide field of wreckage stretching toward the horizon. It reminded him of old battlefield sites he had seen on other worlds, places where great wars had been fought and never fully cleaned up. But something about this felt older and colder than any battlefield he had walked before. "Yeeth," he said, "can you get a read on how old this is?" Eithmol knelt near one of the taller metal shapes and pulled out a small device, pressing it against the rusted surface. He waited a moment as it worked, then frowned at the reading. "This is strange," he said. "The metal itself reads as very old, hundreds of years, maybe more. But some of these energy traces Lyra found earlier are much newer, days old, maybe less." The team went quiet at that. If the wreckage was hundreds of years old, but something inside it was still active, still giving off fresh energy, that meant whatever was buried beneath this land was not simply dead ruins. It meant something down there was still working, even now. "Could be automatic systems," Lyra offered. "Old machines with power sources, built to last centuries. It happens. I've seen old ruins on other worlds, still running basic functions, long after the people who built them were gone." "Or something down there is still awake," Dorn said. No one answered that. They kept walking. As the morning went on, they came across the first structure that was clearly still whole. It rose out of the broken earth like a giant curved wall, exactly as Lyra had seen in the old satellite photo weeks before. Up close, it was even bigger than the image had suggested, at least 60 meters tall. Its surface a dull, dark gray, covered in deep grooves that ran in patterns none of them recognized. It curved away in both directions, disappearing over small hills on either side, and though parts of it had clearly broken away or collapsed, most of the wall still stood, silent and massive against the pale morning sky. "This is not human," Lyra said, staring up at it. "I would bet my career on that. Humans don't build like this. This is too big, too strange. The material isn't anything I've read about in assembly records either." Voss walked closer, tilting his head back to look up at the towering wall. Up close, he could see faint markings carved into the surface, rows of strange symbols that ran along the grooves, worn down by time but still visible if you looked closely. They were nothing like human writing, and nothing like Threxian, or any of the dozen alien scripts he had studied over the years. "Can you read any of this?" he asked Lyra. She stepped closer, running her scanner over the markings, capturing images for later study. "No," she admitted. "I've never seen a language like this before. Whoever made this wall, they weren't human, and they weren't any of the species we know." That thought hung heavy in the cold morning air. If this wasn't human, and it wasn't any of the known species in the Galactic Assembly, then something else had come to Earth long ago. Something old enough, and strong enough, to build a wall 60 meters tall out of material no one in the current galaxy recognized. And something had destroyed it. "Look here," Dorn called from a little further down the wall. He was standing beside a section that had cracked open, revealing a dark space behind it, like a doorway torn open by force rather than design. "This is a breach point. Something broke through here. From the outside, based on how the metal is bent." Voss walked over and studied the broken section carefully. Dorn was right. The edges of the gap curled outward, as if something massive had struck the wall from the far side and forced its way through. Not a natural collapse. An attack. "Someone broke in," Voss said slowly. "Or something broke out." He looked at his team. All three of them were watching him now, waiting for a decision. Every part of his training told him to turn back here, to record what they had found, and return to the ship with their photographs and readings. It was more than enough to bring back to Fleet Director Rel. It would prove that something extraordinary was hidden here, whatever the full truth turned out to be. But the gap in the wall pulled at him, dark and quiet, promising answers to questions that had followed him for months. He thought of the human officer's pale face at that dinner, the fear in his eyes when the zone had come up. Humans were terrified of this place, terrified enough to hide it from the entire galaxy for decades. What kind of thing could scare a species that had already survived wars, plagues, and disasters on its own homeworld? He needed to know. "We go in," Voss said, "just far enough to see what's inside. If it looks dangerous, we leave immediately." Dorn hesitated. "Commander, this goes beyond observation. If something is still active in there." "I know the risk," Voss said, cutting him off gently but firmly. "I'm not asking you to fight anything. I'm asking for eyes and readings, nothing more. If we see any sign of danger, real danger, we turn around instantly. No arguments. Agreed?" The team exchanged a look, but none of them argued further. They had followed Voss on missions before, and he had always brought them home. Slowly they moved toward the broken gap in the massive wall, weapons ready but lowered, sensors humming quietly as they scanned every step forward. Inside, the air changed instantly. It grew colder, and strangely still, as if the wind outside could not reach this place at all. Their lights clicked on automatically as they stepped into the dark, throwing narrow beams across a wide open space that stretched far beyond what their lights could show. The floor beneath them was smooth, unlike the broken ground outside, made of the same dark material as the wall. As they moved deeper, their lights caught glimpses of shapes along the walls, tall frames, some still standing, others fallen and broken, arranged in long rows that stretched into the darkness, like some kind of gallery, or perhaps a memorial. Lyra stepped closer to one of the standing frames, lifting her light to see it clearly, and stopped, her breath catching. "Voss," she said quietly, "you need to see this." He walked over, and his own light joined hers, illuminating the frame fully. What he saw made his skin go cold beneath his suit. It was a creature, frozen in place, encased in some kind of dark material that had hardened around it like glass. Its body was nothing like anything Voss had ever seen. Long, segmented limbs, a shell-like covering across its back, and a head with far too many eyes, all closed now, as if it had been caught mid-motion and simply stopped. It stood taller than any of them, easily 3 meters, its clawed limbs frozen in a pose that looked, uncomfortably, like it had been reaching for something when it was captured. "There are more," Dorn said, his voice low, moving his light along the row. Frame after frame stretched into the darkness, each one holding another of the strange creatures, some standing, some collapsed, some torn apart entirely, as if something had destroyed them before they could ever be fully sealed. "This is not a ruin," Lyra whispered. "This is a battlefield, or a prison, or both." Voss stared at the frozen creature in front of him, its many eyes shut, its claws reaching for something long gone. Whatever these beings were, they had come to Earth once, in great numbers if the rows stretching into the dark were any sign. And something, or someone, had stopped them, trapped them here in this vast, silent hall beneath the frozen ground. He thought again of the human officer's fear. Now, for the first time, he understood it might not have been fear of a weapon, or fear of losing a resource. It might have been something much simpler, and much older. Fear of what had happened here once. Fear of what these things had been. And fear, perhaps, of what might happen if they ever woke again. A soft, low hum began somewhere deep in the hall, so quiet at first that none of them noticed it. It grew slowly, steady and rhythmic, like something vast breathing after a very long sleep. Yeath's scanner beeped sharply in his hand, and he looked down at it, his face going pale in the dim light. "Commander," he said, his voice tight. "Power levels in this hall just spiked. Something just turned on." Voss looked back at the frozen creature in front of him, at its many closed eyes, and for one terrible moment, he was certain he saw one of them twitch. "Everyone out," he said quietly. "Now." But even as they turned to run, the humming grew louder, filling the vast dark hall like a heartbeat waking from a long, long sleep. The 4 Threxians ran through the dark hall, their lights bouncing wildly across the frozen rows of creatures, as the low hum behind them grew into a steady pulse, like a great heart beating somewhere deep beneath the earth. Voss led the way, his own heart pounding almost as loud as the sound chasing them, his mind racing through every possible explanation, and finding none of them good. "Talk to me, Yeath," he shouted as they ran. "What triggered this?" "I don't know," Ith called back, his eyes on the scanner in his hand even as his legs carried him forward. "Power spike came from deep underground, not from us. We didn't touch anything." "Then something else did," Lyra said, her breath coming hard as she kept pace with the others. "Or something in here has been waiting." They burst back out through the broken gap in the great wall, into the pale morning light, and kept running, until they had put a good distance between themselves and the dark opening behind them. Only then did Voss call a halt, turning back to look at the massive structure they had just fled. Nothing followed them out. The hum, faint now from this distance, continued steadily, but no creature emerged from the darkness. No alarm sounded, nothing chased them across the broken ground. After a long minute, Voss allowed himself to breathe again. "Report," he said, still watching the gap in the wall. Lyra checked her sensors, her hands slightly unsteady. "The power signature is still rising, slowly. Whatever turned on in there is not fully active yet. It might take time to reach full strength, if that's even what's happening. I can't be certain from this distance." "Could it have been an automatic system?" Dorn asked. "Some kind of motion sensor, triggered by our presence?" "Maybe," Lyra said. "But if that's true, the system reacted almost half an hour after we entered. That's a long delay for a simple sensor. It felt more like something slowly waking up, like a machine coming back online after a very long time asleep, rather than something reacting instantly to an intruder." Voss thought about the frozen creature he had seen up close, its many eyes shut, its claws reaching for something long gone. He thought about the slight twitch he thought he'd seen, and wondered now if it had been real, or simply his mind playing tricks in the dark. "We need more information before we decide what to do next," he said. "Lyra, can you access any of the buried data systems from out here? See if we can learn what this place actually is, without going back inside." Lyra nodded and knelt down, pulling a second, more sensitive device from her pack. She pressed it against the cracked earth and began a slow scan, her face tight with concentration as she worked. The others stood watch around her, weapons ready, eyes scanning the empty horizon for any sign of movement. Minutes passed. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the faint metallic smell they had noticed the night before. Stronger now than it had been. Somewhere far in the distance, a low rumble rolled across the land, like distant thunder on a clear day. "I'm picking up structure," Lyra said finally, her voice tense with focus. "This isn't just one building. It's a network, spreading out beneath the surface for kilometers in every direction. And there's something else. Old data fragments. Damaged but still there. I'm going to try to pull a translation." She worked in silence for several more minutes, while Voss paced a slow circle around her, watching the horizon, watching the broken wall, watching for any sign that whatever was waking beneath the ground had noticed them at all. "Got something," Lyra said at last. "It's fragmented, and I can't get a full translation. Our systems don't fully understand the language, but there are repeated symbols, over and over, in what looks like warning messages, based on pattern matching against similar warning structures we've seen on other old ruins. I believe this says something like, 'Contained, do not release, do not wake.'" The words settled over the group like a weight. Dorn shifted his stance, gripping his weapon a little tighter. "Contained," he repeated. "So this is a prison. Or a grave that isn't as dead as it looks," Yeath muttered. Voss stared at the broken wall in the distance, the low hum still rolling faintly across the wind. Pieces were beginning to fall into place in his mind, forming a picture he did not like. The frozen creatures, the massive scale of the buried structure, the ancient warning symbols, the human fences and cameras, and decades of silence. This was not a human weapon, and it was not a human resource. This was a species that had come to Earth long ago, in great enough numbers to require walls 60 meters tall to contain them, and something, or someone, had won that war, and sealed the survivors away, deep beneath the frozen ground. And humans had kept that secret, and kept that seal in place, for who knew how long, without a single word to the rest of the galaxy. "We need to leave," Voss said finally. "We have enough. Photographs, readings, translated fragments. This is more than enough proof for Director Rel. We are not equipped to deal with whatever is waking down there, and it is not our place to interfere with it." For once, none of the team argued. They began the long walk back toward the fence line, moving faster now than they had on the way in, glancing often over their shoulders at the great broken wall shrinking slowly behind them. They had covered perhaps 5 kilometers when Yeath's scanner beeped sharply again, and he stopped, staring down at it with a confused frown. "That's strange," he said. "What is it?" Voss asked, turning back. "I'm picking up movement," Yeath said slowly. "Not from the wall, from above us. Something's in orbit. Something big, and it wasn't there when we landed." Lyra pulled out her own device, scanning the sky, though of course nothing was visible to the naked eye through the pale daylight. After a moment, her face went still. "He's right. There's a large object in high orbit, directly above this region. It wasn't in any of our pre-mission scans." Voss felt a cold weight settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the freezing wind. "Human? I can't tell from this range," Lyra said. "But it wasn't there before, and it's positioned exactly over the zone. That's not a coincidence." Dorn's jaw tightened. "They know we're here." "We don't know that," Voss said, though his own voice lacked conviction. "It could be routine. A supply ship, a weather satellite, anything. Over the one place on this planet they've hidden from the entire galaxy for decades," Dorn said. "Commander, I don't believe in that kind of coincidence." Voss didn't either, if he was honest with himself. He looked up at the empty sky, imagining the object Lyra's sensors had found, hanging silently far above them, watching. He thought about every camera they had passed on the fence line, some old and rusted, but others clearly newer, still working, their small red lights blinking steadily through the dark. He thought about how easily they had found the gap in the fence, how convenient it had seemed at the time. A terrible thought crept into his mind, one he tried to push away but could not quite silence. What if they had not slipped past human security at all? What if they had been allowed in? "Keep moving," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Fast as we can. Back to the shuttle. We get off this planet, and we figure out what that object is once we're safely away." They picked up their pace, moving in a tight formation now, eyes constantly flicking to the sky, as much as the ground ahead. The wind grew colder as the day wore on, and the pale sun offered little warmth as it crossed the gray sky above them. They were perhaps 10 kilometers from the fence line when Dorn, at the rear of the group, suddenly stopped and raised a fist, the signal for silence. The others froze instantly, weapons coming up as they scanned the empty white land around them. "What is it?" Voss whispered. "I heard something," Dorn said quietly, his eyes fixed on a low ridge of snow and broken rock, about 200 meters to their left. Movement. Not one of us. They waited, tense and silent, the only sound the wind sweeping across the frozen ground. Long seconds passed with nothing. Then, slowly, a figure rose from behind the ridge, standing calmly in the open, making no move to hide or attack. It was a human, a woman, tall, wearing a heavy winter coat over what looked like some kind of uniform, her dark hair pulled back, her face calm in a way that struck Voss as deeply unsettling given the situation. She carried no visible weapon, and she made no move toward them at all. She simply stood there, watching them across the open snow, as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Commander Voss Kale," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the cold, still air. "I think it's time we talked." Voss's blood ran cold. She knew his name, she knew his rank. She had been waiting for them, out here in the middle of a frozen wasteland, thousands of kilometers from any human settlement he was aware of. Behind him, he heard Lyra whisper, almost to herself. They knew. They knew the entire time. The woman did not move closer, and she did not raise her voice again. She simply stood there, patient and still, watching them with calm, steady eyes, as if the 4 armed Threxians, standing across the snow from her, posed no threat to her at all. And somewhere far above them, in the quiet dark of orbit, the object Lyra's sensors had detected began, very slowly, to change its course. For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind swept across the empty snow between them, carrying the same cold metallic smell they had noticed since entering the zone. Voss stood with his team, weapons half raised, staring at the lone woman, who watched them without a trace of fear on her calm face. "Who are you?" Voss called out finally, his voice steady, despite the tension coiling in his chest. "My name is Elena Cross," the woman answered. "I work with the human government's Office of Off-World Relations. You might say, I'm the person your species talks to when things like this happen." She took a few slow steps closer, her hands visible and empty at her sides. "You can lower your weapons, Commander. If I wanted you dead, you would already be dead. All 4 of you, the moment you crossed that fence line." Dorn's grip tightened on his weapon. That's a bold claim from an unarmed woman standing alone in the snow. Elena's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'm not alone, Sergeant Rask. I haven't been alone since you crossed the perimeter fence 18 hours ago." She tilted her head slightly toward the sky. "Ask your scientist about the object she detected in orbit a few minutes ago. Ask her how long it's actually been there, versus how long ago your sensors picked it up." Lyra's face went pale, as she quickly checked her readings again. "She's right," she said quietly. "The orbital signature has traces consistent with a much longer presence. My earlier scan should have caught it days ago. It didn't. Which means it was hidden from you," Elena finished for her. "Until we decided you should see it." Voss felt the ground shift beneath his understanding of the entire mission. He had believed, foolishly it now seemed, that they had slipped past human defenses through skill and careful planning. The truth settling over him now was far less comfortable. They had not evaded anything. They had been watched, tracked, and allowed to walk exactly where they walked, doing exactly what they did, from the very first step across that broken fence. "You let us in," he said slowly. "We did," Elena confirmed. "It seemed the fastest way to have this conversation." "Diplomatic channels move slowly, Commander. Secret alien scouting teams breaking into restricted zones tend to speed things up considerably." She glanced past them, toward the great broken wall now far behind, barely visible against the horizon. "I imagine you have questions about what you found in there." "We know it's not human," Voss said carefully. "We know something was sealed inside, something dangerous." "The Skarn," Elena said simply. "That's what we call them. I don't know what they called themselves. We never got the chance to ask, and honestly, we wouldn't have wanted to." Her expression grew distant, the calm confidence flickering for just a moment into something older, heavier. "They came 140 years ago. before satellites tracked deep space the way they do now, before anyone on Earth had any idea we weren't alone in the universe. They landed in what was then Siberia, in numbers no one had prepared for, and within 6 months, they had taken the entire region and were pushing further every week. 6 months, Dorn said quietly. That's fast. It was fast because we didn't understand what we were fighting, Elena said. We thought it was a natural disaster at first, some kind of plague or geological event. By the time anyone understood we were being invaded, they already held territory the size of a small country. We lost cities. We lost more people in those 6 months than in some of our worst wars combined. She paused, looking back toward the distant wall. And then we adapted. Because that's what humans do, Commander Kale. Whatever else you've heard about us, whatever your reports say, understand this. We adapt faster than almost anything else in this galaxy. Because we've had to. Over and over. Throughout our entire history. Voss said nothing, listening closely now, the earlier fear in his chest, slowly being replaced by something more complicated. It took us 11 years, Elena continued. 11 years of war, using nothing but our own technology, weapons we built ourselves without any outside help, without any allies, without any galaxy of species to call on. We didn't have warp drives or energy shields back then. We had bullets, and bombs, and sheer stubborn refusal to lose our own planet. 11 years, and in the end, we didn't just push them back, we buried them. All of them that we couldn't kill outright, we sealed beneath the ground, in containment structures that took another 20 years to fully complete. Using technology we reverse-engineered from their own wrecked ships. She looked directly at Voss now. That wall you walked through, Commander. Human hands built that. Human minds designed the seals holding those creatures in stasis for the last 100 years. Not because we found some ancient alien graveyard we didn't understand. Because we won a war against something that nearly ended us, and we chose to end it properly, rather than simply move on and pretend it never happened. The wind seemed colder suddenly, or perhaps it was simply the weight of what Voss was hearing. He thought of the frozen creature he had stood before in the dark hall, its many eyes closed, its claws reaching for something long gone. He had assumed, without ever questioning it, that he was looking at ancient ruins built by some forgotten precursor species, a mystery beyond human understanding. It had never once occurred to him that the seals, the walls, the entire vast containment structure beneath the frozen ground had been built by human hands, within human memory, using nothing but human resolve. You never told anyone, Lyra said quietly. In 40 years of contact with the Assembly, you never once mentioned this. Would you have believed us? Elena asked, not unkindly. A species with no warp technology of our own, no energy weapons, no galaxy-spanning empire, telling you we fought off and buried an alien invasion using rifles and steel. Most species we've met already look at us like slow children who got lucky joining the bigger community. Telling that story wouldn't have earned us respect, Commander. It would have earned us pity, or worse, curiosity from species who might wonder what else was buried beneath our world, worth digging up. Voss thought of Fleet Director Rel and the eager, hungry look in his eyes when Voss had first suggested this mission. He thought of his own reasoning at the time, that if humans were hiding a weapon, the Threxians should be the ones to find it first. He felt a slow, uncomfortable shame settle into his chest. Why show us at all then? He asked. Why not simply stop us at the fence, or arrest us, or send us home in disgrace? Elena's expression grew serious. Because that hum you heard, deep in that hall, that wasn't an automatic system reacting to your presence, Commander. That was real. Something down there has been slowly waking for the last 3 days, and it has nothing to do with you walking through that gap in the wall. She let that settle for a moment before continuing. We've monitored fluctuations in the containment field for weeks now. Small ones, nothing alarming on their own, but your arrival, your movement through the structure, your equipment's energy signatures, they may have accelerated something we were already worried about. We don't fully understand why the Skarn are stirring after a century of dormancy. We only know that they are, and that whatever happens next concerns your people as much as it concerns mine. Dorn lowered his weapon slightly, his earlier suspicion giving way to something closer to alarm. You're saying we might have made this worse. I'm saying, Elena said carefully, that right now, the most useful thing your team can do is come with me, quietly, and let us figure out together what's happening beneath that wall, before it becomes a problem for more than just Earth. She looked at each of them in turn, her calm gaze steady, despite the gravity of what she was describing. I didn't come out here to arrest you, Commander Kale. I came out here because in about 6 hours, a full human response team will reach this location to reinforce the containment field, and I would much rather you were standing beside us when that happens than running from us in a panic with weapons drawn. Voss looked at his team. Lyra's face was pale but thoughtful, already turning over the scientific implications of what they'd been told. Dorn remained tense, but was listening carefully, his soldier's instincts weighing the honesty in Elena's voice. Ith simply looked overwhelmed, glancing repeatedly toward the distant wall, as if he expected something to come crawling out of it at any moment. Voss made his decision the way he made most decisions, quickly and based on instinct built over years of command. "We'll come with you," he said, "but I want the full truth, Ms. Cross. Everything. Starting with why that field is failing now, after 100 years of holding." Elena nodded slowly, something like respect flickering across her calm features. "Fair enough, Commander. Follow me. And for what it's worth," she added, turning to lead them across the frozen ground, "you should know that your mission, breaking into our most restricted territory, uncovering a century-old secret we've never shared with a single other species in the galaxy, was reckless, dangerous, and completely against every treaty our governments have signed." "I'm aware," Voss said grimly. "I know," Elena said. "I just wanted you to hear yourself admit it before I tell you the good news." "There's good news?" Elena glanced back at him, and this time her smile was real, if grim. "The good news, Commander, is that you happened to break in on exactly the week we needed extra hands. Welcome to the team." Behind them, faint but growing steadily louder on the cold wind, the deep hum beneath the broken wall continued its slow, steady rhythm, like something ancient, counting down the final hours of a century-long sleep. Elena led the 4 Threxians across the frozen land, toward a low ridge Voss had not noticed before, hidden cleverly beneath a covering of packed snow and gray rock. As they approached, a section of the ground itself slid open silently, revealing a hidden entrance and a set of metal stairs descending into a well-lit facility, buried beneath the surface. Voss exchanged a glance with his team before following her down. The facility below was nothing like the ancient, silent halls they had explored earlier. This was modern, humming with quiet activity, its corridors lined with monitors and control panels, staffed by dozens of humans moving briskly between stations. Every screen Voss passed showed some part of the vast containment structure they had walked through hours earlier. Its walls, its buried chambers, and rows upon rows of frozen shapes he now understood were the sealed remains of an invasion humanity had fought and won entirely alone. "This way," Elena said, leading them into a wide central room, dominated by a huge curved display showing a glowing model of the entire containment field, stretching for kilometers beneath the ground. Red warning markers blinked steadily across several sections of the display, clustered most heavily near the breach point the Threxian team had entered through hours before. A tired-looking man in a gray uniform turned from a nearby console as they entered. "Elena, thank goodness. Field integrity just dropped another 4% in the last hour. We're now down to 61% across sectors 12 through 18. "Bring me up to speed," Elena said, gesturing for Voss and his team to stand near the display. "Commander Kale and his people are going to be helping us for the time being." The tired man glanced at the Threxians with visible surprise but didn't argue. "Right, short version. The containment field wasn't designed to run forever. It was built as the best solution we had 100 years ago, meant to hold for a few decades while we figured out something more permanent. We never fully solved that problem, and the field's been slowly degrading for the last 15 years. We've been reinforcing it with patches and backup generators, but the core systems are old, and parts are failing faster than we can replace them." "And the Skarn inside?" Voss asked. "Are they truly waking, or is this simply mechanical failure?" The man hesitated, glancing at Elena before answering. "Both, we think. As containment weakens in certain sectors, biological readings from some of the frozen Skarn show faint signs of returning activity. Nothing fully conscious yet, as far as we can tell, but definitely not fully dormant either. If the field fails completely, we could be looking at a partial or full revival of a hostile force numbering in the tens of thousands, right here on Earth." Lyra stepped closer to the display, studying the glowing model with intense focus. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward one of the empty consoles. The tired man glanced at Elena again, who nodded after only a brief pause. "Go ahead," Elena said. "We need every mind we can get on this right now, human or otherwise." Lyra sat down and began working through the data with quiet efficiency, her scientist training taking over completely, as she cross-referenced the readings against everything Threxian scans had gathered during their brief exploration of the ruins. Ith joined her a moment later, offering his own technical knowledge, the two of them falling into an easy rhythm, despite having met the human engineers only minutes before. Voss watched them work for a moment, before turning back to Elena. "What do you need from us, specifically?" "Honestly," Elena admitted, "I'm not entirely sure yet. But your ship's sensors picked up energy signatures our systems missed. Your scientists' readings from inside the structure gave us data we didn't have an hour ago. And frankly, Commander, whatever technology your people used to slip past our outer defenses undetected, until we allowed it, might prove useful in reinforcing our own systems." She met his eyes steadily. "This isn't charity, Commander Kale. We genuinely need the help. I'm simply choosing to ask for it from the alien team that broke into our most guarded secret, rather than pretending we can solve this entirely alone." Hours passed in a blur of steady, focused work. Lyra and Eth collaborated closely with the human engineering team, comparing Threxian containment technology from their own history against the aging human systems holding the Skarn in place. Slowly, a plan began to take shape. A combination of Threxian energy stabilization methods and human structural reinforcement, designed to buy enough time to properly repair the failing containment field before anything inside could fully wake. Dorn, meanwhile, found himself drawn into conversation with a group of human soldiers preparing to reinforce the physical barriers around the breach point. He listened and slowly began contributing as they discussed defensive positions and fallback plans in case containment failed entirely before repairs could be completed. He was surprised, more than once, by how calmly and competently the human soldiers discussed the possibility of facing an alien horde nearly a century in the making. There was fear in their eyes, certainly, but it sat alongside a grim determination that reminded him, uncomfortably, of his own people's finest soldiers. Voss spent most of the following hours simply observing, learning, and occasionally offering what strategic insight he could from his own military experience. He watched human engineers work through the night without complaint, watched Elena coordinate a dozen different teams with calm, steady authority, and watched his own people slowly shift from cautious outsiders to genuine contributors in an effort that mattered far beyond simple diplomacy or trade advantage. By the time the sun rose again over the frozen zone, the combined team had stabilized the worst of the failing sectors, buying, according to the latest projections, at least another 18 months before the field would need this level of attention again. It wasn't a permanent solution. Everyone in that control room understood that clearly. But it was enough, for now, and given the circumstances, that felt like more than enough. Elena found Voss standing near the great curved display sometime after the crisis had passed, staring quietly at the glowing model of the containment field, now showing steady green readings across most of its length. "Your report to Fleet Director Rel is going to be interesting," she said, coming to stand beside him. Voss let out a tired breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. "That may be the understatement of my career." He glanced at her. "What happens now? To us, I mean. We did break your laws, and several treaties besides. That's above my authority to decide," Elena admitted, "but I intend to recommend leniency, given the circumstances. You broke the rules, Commander, but you also stayed and helped when it mattered most, instead of running the moment things became dangerous. That counts for something in my book." "And the Skarn?" Voss asked. "What happens to them, long term? You can't hold this field together forever, with patches and reinforcements." Elena's expression grew serious. "No, we can't. Which is exactly why I think it's time to stop hiding this entirely." She looked at him directly. "Humanity has carried this secret alone for 100 years, Commander, because we were afraid of how the galaxy would see us if the truth came out. Afraid of being seen as a threat, or worse, as a prize to be taken advantage of. But keeping this secret nearly cost us everything today, simply because we didn't have enough outside expertise or resources to maintain a permanent solution. You're saying you want to bring this to the Assembly. Voss said, surprised. I'm saying I think it's time the galaxy understood exactly what humanity survived, entirely on our own, before we ever met a single one of you, Elena said. Not as a threat, and not as a boast, simply as the truth. Maybe it changes how people see us, maybe it doesn't. But I'd rather face that honestly, than lose everything to a crumbling secret we can't maintain by ourselves. Voss considered her words carefully, thinking of the frozen creature he had stood before in the dark, of the vast scale of the war humanity had fought and won, without any help from a wider galaxy that hadn't even known they existed at the time. He thought of his own people's easy dismissal of humans as weak, as young, as lesser. He thought of how badly, and how completely, that assumption had been proven wrong over the last 2 days. For what it's worth, he said slowly, I don't think this story will make the Assembly pity you, Miss Cross. I think it will make them very, very careful about ever underestimating your people again. Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. That's honestly all I'm hoping for, Commander. 3 weeks later, the Threxian Assembly received a formal briefing from the human government, detailing the full history of the Skarn invasion, the century-long war fought entirely with human resources, and the current state of the containment field, beneath what had once been called the Forbidden Zone. Alongside the report came a formal request, extended to every species within the Galactic Assembly, for shared expertise in permanently securing the site, offering in exchange full transparency and cooperation on a matter humanity had once guarded alone in silence. The reaction across the galaxy was immediate, and largely unexpected by those species who had long considered humans little more than fortunate newcomers to the wider community. Species who had quietly looked down on humanity's lack of advanced weapons or vast fleets found themselves reconsidering, quite seriously, exactly what humans were capable of building and surviving, using nothing but their own determination and ingenuity. Fleet Director Rel, upon hearing Voss's full report, said very little at first, staring for a long moment at the images Lyra had captured deep beneath the frozen ground. When he finally spoke, it was not with anger at the reckless mission, but with something closer to quiet, uneasy respect. We thought we were looking at their weakness, he said finally, their one great secret, hidden out of fear or shame. We were wrong, Voss said simply. We were looking at their strength. We simply didn't understand what we were seeing, until we looked closer. Rel nodded slowly, setting the images aside. Their first mistake, letting us find that place at all. Voss thought of Elena's calm, steady presence on that frozen field, of the human engineers working tirelessly through the night beside his own team, of the vast silent hall filled with the sealed remains of an invasion humanity had faced entirely alone and ultimately won. No, Voss said quietly. I don't think it was a mistake at all. I think they wanted us to see exactly what we found, and I think, Director, that our mistake was ever assuming we understood them, before we bothered to truly look. Outside, far above the quiet, frozen zone that had kept humanity's greatest secret for 100 years, the stars continued their slow turn across the sky, indifferent to the shifting opinions of a galaxy that had just been forced, quite firmly, to look at humanity a little more closely than before.